Thank you, Chairman Capito and Ranking Member Whitehouse, for holding today's important hearing, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today to share your experiences as well on what we need to do to reform our federal permitting process. I believe we can make common sense permitting reform to unleash the projects for the American energy, infrastructure, home building, agriculture, all those sort of things, while protecting our environment. Permitting reform is about modernizing our regulatory system to ensure that we're deploying projects efficiently, not about undercutting environmental standards. Regulatory delay for permitting infrastructure, energy, and environmental projects is a hidden tax on Americans. This Congress, I'm excited to serve as chairman of the Fisheries, Water, and Wildlife Subcommittees. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Endangered Species Act, and Clean Water Act are within the subcommittee's jurisdiction. In Nebraska, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers often finds itself in the middle of all these important policies. In addition to maintaining waterways and providing power, the Corps is responsible for flood prevention and to protect both natural and built environment. Conflicting statutes like the Flood Control Act of 1944 and the Endangered Species Act actually pit protecting human life and property against protecting wildlife and the environment. Complicated court history and administrative actions relating to the devastating flood events along the Missouri River has made even the most common sense projects to prevent avoidable and anticipated flooding difficult to permit. The lack of clear congressional intent and direction has compounded a difficult situation and authorized unintended priorities and created new environmental programming. Situations like this can be found all across the country. Western wildfire victims, biofuel proponents, and residential developers find themselves navigating the same impossible regulatory scheme. We do not have to settle for years-long court battles, bureaucratic backlogs, and complex statutes at the expense of natural resources and safety. The Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2023 reformed the National Environmental Policy Act for the first time in 50 years to mandate timelines and page counts for environmental analysis. The FRA also streamlined the use of categorical exclusions, which should expedite the deployment of CEQ-approved activities. As governor, one of the things I did to be able to help streamline this was implemented a process called Lean Six Sigma, and I know the chairman's can't get through any sort of hearing without me trying to mention Lean Six Sigma when we're talking about permitting reform, because this is one of the things we did that, again, shouldn't be controversial. It's about streamlining the process, which we've been all talking about here today. So, for example, we can't change environmental regulations to the state, but we could look at the process. It was 110 steps long, for example, to issue an air construction permit. We cut that down to 22 and cut the time delay down from issuing that permit from 190 days to just 65 days. Those are the kind of reforms that are possible thanks to the great staff we had in Nebraska. And actually, one of those folks, the gentleman who ran my Department of Environment and Energy, Jim Macy, has the Region 7 EPA administrator. So I'm really pleased to see him doing that. The point is, we can do this. Ms. Pilconis, you talked about some of the conflicting regulations maybe agencies are doing. I mentioned the Flood Control Act and the Endangered Species Act. Can you give me some examples of laws or regulations that are conflicting that we may need to address to be able to provide clear congressional intent so that the courts will have that when they're making these decisions?
I think the clear congressional intent is most important, having clear statutory language that lays out Congress's intent, making sure that that's carried out and implemented by the agencies, and for Congress to be able to step in when agencies are showing overreach or they're causing conflicting or inconsistent determinations. As far as where there are conflicts, I mean, we've got, NEPA, the overarching statute, bringing all the resource agencies together at the table to try to analyze and assess what the impact of a proposed major action will be. The idea is having coordination and communication and discussion about how these programs align, and so that you can do concurrent reviews instead of sequential reviews and end up having the monitoring, the studies, the work that you're doing satisfy all of the programs so that you can reach one final document.
Just off the top of your head, can you think of, are there specific conflicting laws that we need to address through this process, or are there specific agency regulations that we need to address through this process?
I mean, what comes to mind for me is not so much conflict between the laws, but inconsistent interpretation of the laws at the federal agency level, and making sure that the application is consistent so that you don't have diverging different opinions. With NEPA and recent court decisions and executive actions, I mean, it is not clear what the long-term role CEQ will play in implementing regulations. We need to be sure that when federal agencies are implementing NEPA and carrying out NEPA through their own agency regulations, that we don't have inconsistency. And so that's an area that we are focused on moving forward, and ensuring that agencies carry out NEPA consistently per the statute.
I think we'd all agree that that consistency is going to be important, especially when it comes to the interpretation. Is there something this committee can do along those lines as we're thinking about reform, things that we ought to be putting into the statute to be able to accomplish that?
I think making sure that terms are clear. As Mr. Harris talked about with the Clean Water Act, I mean, we've got language in the regulation that is being inconsistently applied. With NEPA, great work was done in the Fiscal Responsibility Act, being clear that you're analyzing reasonably foreseeable effects, that you're looking at reasonable alternatives that are technologically and economically feasible. How is that being implemented? And Congress having oversight and stepping in where agencies are implementing that inconsistently.
Great. Thank you very much.